So you know how to implement all CRUD operations with Dapper for a simple table. But what about when you have more complex data models with different types of relationships? How do you handle a one-to-one, a one-to-many, and a many-to-many relationship efficiently with Dapper? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. Alright, now first let's have a look at our current situation. Here you see when you get the code, it is available for free, link in the video description. But first, please watch and learn and then download the code. But for now, you see that you will also get a scripts folder here with a script to create the complete database. So I'm using SQL Server Express here. As you can see here, I already have a Blazing Block database and the video game database Simple. Now the Simple database is from, let's say, the first tutorial where we implement CRUD operations for just one single table. As you can see here, there's only a video games table. It's like a small video game database, right? And Blazing Block is from the .NET Web Academy, so please ignore that. But of course, if you want to have a look, link as always in the video description. But now let's add a new query, and this now is our script. So as you can see, this is now the video game database normalized, and normalized, this means that up to the first 3 normal forms, everything is in there. I hope, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. First one, atomic data, right? Only one piece of data in a table column. Then the second one, we make sure that all the data in the row depends on the whole row. And the third one, in essence, we have no duplicates. For instance, we can see that in the simple database. In this table, you see these columns here. We have the title, the publisher, and the developer. And the publisher and the developer are also strings in essence. So if we have 2 games, for instance, that are published by Nintendo, this is a violation of the third normal form because Nintendo could be moved into a separate table. And this is what we did here in the normalized database so that we don't have any duplicate values. And as you can see here, we start actually with the publishers table and also insert some data with or that now Nintendo, Rockstar Games, and so on. We've got developers, we've got platforms, and then of course the video games, game details, and also reviews, and then a joining table for the platforms. We'll talk about that in a minute to explain all the relationships. And that's it. All right, so now let's just run this. First, we have to run the first command to create the database, and then the rest to add all the data. So now let's refresh this thing. And then we see the normalized database. And here now are all the tables. Don't want to save that. All right, so now first, let's have a look at the video games. And as you can see now, we have the title, ID and title, of course, and then publisher and developer means that these are now foreign keys in the end, right? So now when you have a look at Zelda and Animal Crossing, we see that the publisher is 1 and 1, meaning if you would use the simple database, you would have the string there. And this is, again, a duplicate value in essence. So we create another table for that. And this is now the publishers table. When we have a look here, then we see that ID 1 is Nintendo. So this is where we use the foreign key with ID 1 then. And this already is actually a one-to-many relationship, but let's say from the perspective of the publisher, one publisher can have several or multiple video games. Same is true for the developers. But the relationships that I want to focus on is first the game details. All right, because as you can see here, when we open the columns, we see that the video game ID now is a primary key and also a foreign key. So this is really a one-to-one relationship. One video game can only have one entry of game details. So one, again, in this case, Zelda, open world action adventure, game set in the fantasy world, and so on. All right, and the game detail is only related to one video game. Then we've got the reviews. This is a one-to-many relationship, but now let's say from the perspective of the video game. So one video game can have multiple reviews, and one review can only have one video game. So let's open that up. We check this out. You see here the reviews have an ID, And these then use the video game ID as a foreign key, and then we have some data like the reviewer and the content and the rating. All right. And then the last thing is the many-to-many relationship, meaning many games can have many different platforms. So one video game can be set on multiple platforms, or can be available for multiple platforms. And then one platform can have, of course, multiple games. So here, when we check this out, we see this is our pool that we grab the data from, right? So we have the platforms table, then we have the video games table, and to match this many-to-many relationship, we need a joining table, and this is where the video games platform comes in, the video games platforms table. So here, this is really just the so-called joining table in the end, where we only have the IDs. So as you can see, Zelda is, for instance, only available on the first platform, which is the Nintendo Switch. But for instance, the second game, which is Red Dead Redemption, is available for PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Correct me if I'm wrong, but let's have a look again at the video games table. Yeah, Red Dead Redemption. All right. So this is our database set up, and now let's move on with Visual Studio. And here you can see we got a couple of stuff actually. The very first thing is the models, and the models are of course a representation of the tables we just saw in the database. So we have the developer table, ID and name, we have the game details with the same properties, and for some of them I added this comment here, the navigation property, meaning that this is part of the relationship, right? So the game detail has one navigation property, and this is in this case the video game. Platform can have several video games. We've got the publisher, we've got the review, which is also related to video game, and then we've got the video game itself with title, the publisher ID, the developer ID, release date, also publisher and developer, which in essence are also navigation properties, but again, I don't want to focus on them. Regarding the relationships, I thought of the really the game details for the one-to-one, the reviews for one-to-many, and the platforms for many-to-many. I don't know, for me it just made more sense. It was more fun actually. And then we've got the video game platform. Again, this is the joining table or the model for this joining table. All right, so these are the models. What else do we have? Well, we have a repositories folder. This means I would like to implement everything in here in our video game repository. So here you can see I already added the interface and all the methods for that. So what do we want to do? We want to be able to create a video game. We want to be able to get one specific video game. We want to get all the video games, updated video game, and delete video games. And full disclosure here, when we have a look at the implementation class, I only prepared so far getting the connection string for our SQL connection that we need for Dapper, of course, for receiving all the data, and then I implemented automatically already all the methods here. But there are, of course, several ways to do that. You will see that in the implementation. You have to write your SQL by yourself, right? So there are different ways to do that. There are different ways to receive the data, to read it, to update it, and so on. This is one way, but my goal is really, again, for you as a beginner or intermediate developer, that you get enough of an idea how you would work with Dapper and any database. In this case, it's a SQL Server database, SQL Server Express, but I think it makes or is valid for all the relational databases, so that you get the idea, and this helps you implementing whatever you want or have to implement. All right, so this is the big idea here, and I don't say that this is the absolute best way to do it. I don't know if there is a best way to do anything actually. I'm sure there are better ways to do something. I don't know, in particular regarding performance maybe, but again, I think this will give you a good idea. And for the basics, I recommend watching the other video where we do all the CRUD operations for one table. Anyways, this is the repository. Then of course we have the controller here. So this is a web API, meaning that we will use Swagger to just make the calls from the browser. the web service calls, and here we will also then implement these methods, the HTTP request methods, get, post, put, delete. Maybe you know them already, and this is what we'll add here, but that's not a lot of code. And then what else do we have? The programs, yes, of course, where we register the video game repository, and that's pretty much it, I guess. App settings JSON file, this was also important because here we have the connection string. So localhost SQL Express, database is the video game DB normalized, trusted connection set to true. All right, I think that's it. So let's try that, and we start with, let's have a look at the interface first. Getting all video games. I think this makes sense. This is already complicated, but it is the still the easiest one, I would say. So here we are. We want to get all video games and a list or an enumerable of video games. So let's start with that. So asynchronous means that we need the async keyword, and similar to the other video where we did all the CRUD operations for the simple table, we start with the using, and it is really your choice if you want to use braces or curly braces and so on for the scope. It's not necessary, but maybe you are used to it, so I'm just adding it here as well. So you have the connection, and this is a new SQL connection. For that we need system data SQL client. This is something that of course I have to mention. If you don't have this already in your project, you have to install the package for that, system data SQL client, not Microsoft data SQL client, it's system data SQL client, and then the using has been added. And one more thing, I think it's obvious, but still I have to mention that. Please install the Dapper NuGet package, otherwise nothing will work. All right, so here now we use the connection string for our connection, and with that the connection is already open. All right, so you don't have to write connection open async in this case, but later we will use transactions, and I will talk about transactions then when we need to use them. And I don't know, but in my case, in this case, then I had to open the connection manually. I don't know why. Dapper says it is doing this automatically, can do it by its own, but well, I don't know. In my case, I don't know what I did wrong, but you will see this in a sec. So now comes the big string, because we have lots of relationships. So we need to join some stuff. And this is already one thing I wanted to mention here. I will use joins. All right, you can also use single statements. For instance, we could now just use a select a video game, then grab the IDs from the video game there, and then select the publisher where the ID is so and so and so on. You can do that, but then you have a lot of round trips to the database, right? And I can already, when I prepared this, I could already see the comments. Dude, this is for performance, this is really bad. We only want to access the database once, and this is why I added the joins here. So let's just do it like that. So we have a select. We have everything from the video games table. We then have the publisher table, developers, the game details first. And yes, of course, I prepared this. I don't remember anything of that. The reviews, and then the platforms. All right, so that's that, and we want that from the video games table first. So this is our entry point, let's say. I don't know how to format this the best way, but I think this is okay, and you can read it. So now left join publishers p on the video game publisher ID equals the publisher ID. And now let me just copy that, and hopefully we have no copy paste errors, typos, you name it. Then we have developers. See that it's publishers actually and developers. D for developers, where the developer ID is the developer ID. Then another left join for the game details. So game details GD on now the video game ID actually, and here we have the GD video game ID. All right, so now publisher's ID, and here the game details have an ID field. No, the video games have the ID field, but the game details have the video game ID field. All right. Okay, next left join now for the reviews. Reviews are on video game ID, and now video game, nope, reviews also have the video game ID. All right, and we're almost done. We have the video games platforms VGP on video game ID, VGP video game ID, and then the last one, and this is then what we will display. That's why we have the PF table on top only. So here now we want the platforms on the PF ID is VGP platform ID. All right, okay. Now, when we get this, actually, we can run this, and maybe this makes more sense then. So let's add a new query, paste this thing, hit execute. We get all the games here, as you can see. But the problem now is, you see we have duplicate entries, right? So Legend of Zelda, there's only one row, but for instance, Red Dead Redemption 2 is available on 3 platforms. And that's the reason why we see these 3 rows here. It's even worse with, or is it worse? It's actually better with Witcher. It's available on more platforms, even on the Nintendo Switch. And as you can see now, this is not really what we want, right? Cyberpunk is available on multiple platforms and so on. So what can we do here? In the end, we receive a JSON in the end when we make this web service call, but I don't want to have a JSON with these duplicate entries. So what we can do, or what you could do, is we can run a query and either then in the end run the distinct method on this collection. This would work. Or, and this is the approach that I want to show you here, is we can create a dictionary and only add a video game to this dictionary if it's not already there with the specific ID. So let's try that, all right? We have the video game dictionary, which is a new dictionary with almost string and video game. I want an integer for the ID. And now let's get the games with the help of Dapper. So here now we do the following. We have the connection. Actually, it's a synchronous call. So await connection and then query async. And the beautiful thing with query async is that we can add multiple objects here. So for instance, the first one is the video game. Then we have the publisher, we have the developer, and we can of course move on with the game detail, the review platform, and the result then should be a video game. This is why we added here a second time. And then this method, query async, takes some arguments. And the first one is, of course, the actual query. So our SQL that we wrote up here. And after that, as you can not see here, but what we can add here is a method. So we get a couple of objects back with this query. So we have the video game, we have the publisher, the developer, the game detail, review, and the platform. So in the end, this is a function. So let's do something with that function. And what I would like to do is first we check if the current game, because this method then goes through every row in the end. And let's call this then the current game. If the current game is already in our dictionary. All right. So here we check if not the video game dictionary, try get value, video game ID, then we use the current one as our current video game. And in here now well, we just set some values. So current game is a video game, like that. Let's make some more space. Then the current game publisher. So these are now our navigation properties, right? Publisher, we also got the developer, we have the game detail. This is easy. Now regarding the reviews, we first have a new list of reviews. All right, and same for the platforms. Current game platforms is a new list of platforms, and then we add it to our dictionary. So video game dictionary, add video game ID or current game. Maybe this looks better. Okay, and now we already have the games so far with the publisher, developer, and the game details. But what we also want are the reviews and the platforms. So these are lists, right? And as you can see, our one-to-one and many-to-one, let's say, relationships are already done, okay? But now regarding the reviews and the platforms, we have to do something else. So here now, we do the following. We check first if the review, remember, from this SQL query, we got all our objects, right? We have this complete table, but in this table, Dapper can map the single objects, the single tables, let's say, of this join. So now here, what we can do is we check first if the review is not null, and also if the current game has any review with this ID already, and if not, we add it. So here, and current game reviews any, and our lambda expression, the review ID equals the review ID. All right, so if this is not the case, then we know, okay, this review is there, but not already in our list for the current game. So here, let's add this thing. And we do exactly the same thing for the platform. So if platform is not null and current game IntelliCode at its best. Nice. All right, then we add this thing. All right, and in the end, we return current game. Okay, there is actually one more thing that we have to add, but let me first show you this way and then fix it later, because now the last thing that we have to do first is returning the video game dictionary values. All right, okay, I know this is a lot. Now, first, of course, we have to also add the controller method. This is an HTTP GET. So HTTP GET public async task action results a list of video games. And of course, we add the models here, and here now get all video games. And now here we say bar video games is await video game repository, get all video games async, and we return OK video games. Let's try that. All right. My assumption is that we run into an error, but let's have a look first. So here is now Swagger. I removed the weather forecast default controller and model. You can see the schemas here. This is nice. But now let's just try this out. Hit execute and we get an error. As you can see here, it's a multi-map error. Split on column ID was not found. Please ensure your split on parameter is set and in the correct order. Parameter split on. So what does this mean? You see this comes from Dapper. So Dapper wants to split, as it says here, the multiple objects, the multiple tables on a certain ID, and by default this column is the ID column. So if every entity in your database, in your tables, has the ID as primary key, you would maybe not run into this error, and this is why I'm showing you this. But if this is not the case, then you have to add something. So let's go back to the video game repository, and here now we have, or we can add this parameter. So splitOn, as you can see here, the field we should split and read the second object from. And since we have a couple of objects, actually it's 5, and let's check them out again. Actually, we see them here, right? We have the connection, but there's something missing. So here we have the video game, publisher, developer. So this is what it's all about, actually. The publisher, the developer, the game detail, the review, and the platform. So when we have a look here, this is an ID, this is an ID, great, game detail. Oh, this is the video game ID. So maybe we have to change that, but we still have to add all the other ones. So ID, ID, then here it's the video game ID, and then also ID, ID. We save this, run this again. There we are. Try this out, hit execute, and now it works. Isn't that great? And as you can see, this looks interesting because we get everything, right? So we get the ID, the title, the publisher ID, and that's why we added the navigation properties in the model. Maybe you remember, because otherwise we would only see the ID, but we also want to see the name of this thing, of the publisher and the developer, and that's why it makes sense to add the navigation property and then set it in the method. And then we have this review here. This is great, right? And then also the platforms, Nintendo Switch. And now comes Red Dead Redemption, but as you can see, we only see it once, although we have a couple of rows there. But here now the platforms are filled correctly. So we have 3 platforms here, PS4, Xbox One, and the PC. Same for The Witcher. And this would, by the way, also work for the reviews now. When we go back to the tables, and let's have a look here, edit top to 100 rows. And now let's say we have, again, video game 1. This time it's Princess Zelda. I love this game. Definitely a 10 out of 10. And now we run this one more time. Or let's double check. You see here that the review is only, or the list of reviews only has 1 review by link. And then here we execute it one more time. And now we also see with ID 11, Zelda loves this game as well. Isn't that nice? Okay, and with that, reading everything, receiving all the data, we have already covered all the relationships. We have the one-to-one relationship with the game details, right? Which is actually pretty easy. And then regarding the lists, we have to fiddle around a little bit, but then we see that we get all the reviews and also all the platforms. But it is really a combination, regarding the code, it's a combination of the C# code in this case, and also, of course, the select statement that you have, your SQL statement, right? So you have to know your joins, you have to know how to match everything. And I think it makes sense to use an approach where you first play around in a SQL Server Management Studio, for instance, or whatever you're using to run your queries and see what you get from that then. And when you have your table, your result ready, then you move on with Dapper. Okay, and this is how you get all the video games. Now let's move on with a single video game. The fun part is that actually we can copy lots of code here. And I would say we just do it. So let me just copy that, and we will refactor this before you stop the video. We will refactor this, of course, and then see how this makes more sense then. All right, so now here, what do we have? Again, we have a SQL connection, but in this case, we only want one game, right? So here now, we add where the video game ID equals this thing here, the ID. Now this add thing, if you're already familiar with Dapper, you know that this is now a parameter. So in here now, we can actually go through that in the exact same way. We actually even don't need the games variable here, but the method wants to return something, so it doesn't hurt to do that. But here now, we need a parameter. So here, this would be a new object where we say the ID is the given ID of the method. Do it like that. And in the end, we still have a couple of rows actually, and we return just the first or default one. All right, and to fix the error here, of course, we need the async keyword, and then everything should work. So again, the big difference is we need the parameter here that is used in this statement. All right. And regarding our dictionary, we only return the first or default one, so that we only have one entity, because we here expect only one, right? It's not a list of video games, it's just a video game. So let's try that out with, oh yeah, the controller, of course. So now here in the video games controller, let me just copy that. It's an HTTP GET, but this time with an ID as a parameter. So in curly braces, we add the ID, and then we call this get a video game with the ID, and same thing here, get video game async, I think is the name, yep, with the ID, and this is just one game, video game, save that, restart the application. We have our call ready here. Try this out. Let's get Zelda first, and there it is. All right, with all the reviews again, and a game with a couple of platforms. See that here as well. Great. So this is how that would work. Now I promised to refactor this thing, so let's do that. What I would like to do is, because the difference is really only the where statement here, right? The parameter, and then what we return, of course. So what we could do is, first maybe let's write our methods that both can use. Down here, let's add a private string for the SQL query. So get video game SQL bool with where clause. So really we have to decide, do we need this where clause or not? And this thing now again is this big string, but here we first say that we don't need this actually. All right, and only if with where clause, then we say SQL plus equals, and then also the where statements, and in the end we return the SQL like that. And then another private method, async task, returning a complete list in the end, i.e. numerable of video game. We call this query video games async with now the SQL, and then maybe a parameter, right? So by default this thing is null. Okay, and now here we can also copy a couple of stuff. So let me just copy everything and remove the parts that we don't need. So here in this case we don't need the SQL, we already have it. Then we start with our video game dictionary, that's the same. We do our call, do all this logic, magic stuff here, check for the reviews and the platforms, return the current game. Here now we replace this by parameters, like that. Did I not add them here? Parameters, all right. And split is the same, and then we return the values, come on, the first or default, we return all the values, remove the first or default, and then maybe you guessed it, we change the other two methods to only call what we need to call. So let's say for receiving all the video games, we can actually remove everything. All right. And now here we have our SQL, which is the get video game SQL with, could also set this to false by default actually, but anyways, this set to false. Then we have our video games await query video games async with our SQL, no parameter there. We return the video games. And for the single one, pretty similar actually. We remove everything first, and then we copy that, paste it here. This time we need the where clause. We have the parameter again as a new object, ID, like that. And we return, nope, we have the video games, but here now we return the first or default. Okay, let's try that. First, all the video games, hit execute, works, no duplicates, perfect. And now to get a single video game, for instance, Cyberpunk, there it is, great stuff. All right, so now this is the query. And now we get to the commands, in essence, meaning creating, updating, and deleting a video game. So first, let's start with creating. All right, we have again to use using. So here our connection, which is again a new SQL connection with our connection string we get from the app settings JSON file. And now here, I already told you that I have to open the connection manually. I don't know why, but in my case, it was necessary because now we work with the transaction. Let me write the code first and then I will tell you what I mean by that if you're not familiar with this transaction term. So here, connection begin transaction. And what do I mean by that? When we now create a video game, in essence, we have a couple of insert commands, insert statements for our database. So we want to insert the video game, we want to insert a review, we want to insert joining data for the platforms, game details also. So stuff like that, right? And we don't want to do that with one single statement. We have to use a couple of statements because, for instance, when we first run our insert, only after that we know the new ID of the new game that we have added to the database, and then we need this ID to add the game details, for instance, right? So these two alone are already two statements, two commands that we have to run. So what happens now if one of them fails? For instance, the insert of the video game works, but game details did not work. So we have a video game without the details and we don't know that. So something is missing in the database. Could be really, really bad in the long run. And for that, we have transactions. And the transaction, one transaction means that we begin doing something with the database. So for instance, inserting a video game, then the next part is inserting the game details, then comes the next part, the next part, the next part, and only if everything was successful, then we commit the transaction, we end it and say, all right, this worked, we can store everything in the database, great. But if one thing fails, then we have to roll back the whole transaction, so nothing will be added. So for instance, we insert the video game, the details, the reviews, but then something is going wrong with the platforms, then this means we roll back everything, we undo everything else that we did, so nothing is stored in the database. And this is why we need a transaction in this case, and this is why I had to open the connection here. All right, anyways, we have our transaction and we do the next stuff in a try catch block. And this is or comes in pretty handy because at the end of this try catch block, or in the catch case, what we can do is we can write transaction roll back, all right, and then throw the exception. And as you can see here, this means rolls back a transaction from a pending state. So everything we do now here in the try block means that this is a pending state. Okay, so now let's begin with maybe the publisher and the developer details and so on, because we have to make sure that some data is there before we add the video game. So publisher and developer is the first stuff that we should do. For that, we again need well, we don't need to add extra methods for that, but it is a bit more organized, the code in this case, but maybe still, let's begin. So what we want here is first the publisher ID, and for that we will run a method called get or create publisher async, and this thing gets the connection as well as the transaction. And then we will, as you can see here, we have the video game object. So the name is what we will work with in this case. And this is now one case. I told you already that there are so many ways to do this. You could already, or you could also just create an object where you just send the ID there. I know we have the topic of DTOs, data transfer objects, stuff like that, that would make total sense in this specific case, but I wanted to work with the entities, the pure entities here. So maybe that's, otherwise it's too much to already enter the field of DTOs. I've got other tutorials about that, and if you want to see another one, please tell me that, then I can of course add another part of the series here, let's say, where we then add DTOs for all that and map the objects and so on. But here now, what I want to do is use the publisher and then the name of the publisher, and in the end do exactly the same thing for the developer. So here now we have then the developer ID with get or create developer async, and here it's of course the developer like that. But now first the methods that we need for that. So let's add them down here again. So here now we've got a private async task. We get the ID back, get or create publisher async, needs a SQL connection, then a SQL transaction, and a publisher name like that. All right, and here now we add our, or first we check if this publisher is already in the database, and otherwise we add it to the database. So our check SQL would be select ID from publishers, where the name is at name. Then we get the existing publisher ID with await connection, and then connection, and then query first or default async could be null, of course. So we have our check SQL here with a new object where the name is the publisher name, and this time we also have to add the transaction here like that. Okay, now if this thing actually has a value, then we return existing publisher ID value. All right, but otherwise we have to insert it. So string insert SQL, insert SQL is now insert into publishers name values at name. And now to get the ID of this new entry, we have to call or run select cast scope identity as int. Crazy, I know. And now we get the new publisher ID with await connection, and then again query single async this time. And now we definitely should get an integer back. And by the way, the integer, the ID that we get here comes from the select cast. All right, so not from the insert, it's from the select cast. So insert SQL, then the new object, the name is now the publisher, publisher name, and again the transaction, and here we return the new publisher ID. Okay, and what's missing? Yeah, of course. So this is our method to get or create the publisher, and now pretty much the same thing for the developer. So get or create developer async, and we have the developer name here. Developer name, here it's developers. Existing developer ID. All right, developer name, that's correct. And here also developers, new developer ID. And yes, there's definitely a way to refactor this, but let's just keep it like that for now. Okay, now since we're already at the end of this class here of the repository, let's also add other methods that we need, and these are for the game details, the review, and the video game platform. They look pretty much the same, so let's just add them here, and then we can continue with the big create method. So here, private async task create game detail async. So SQL connection, then here of course the game detail, and also the SQL transaction. This is what we need, and let me already create the signatures for the other ones. So here now we have the create review async, and with the review, and also the create video game platform async, and here also then the video game platform. All right, and in here now we need another string, of course. So here insert into game details video game ID, description, rating, and the values are at video game ID, description, and rating, like that. And in the end, we just run await connection execute async SQL, and here now the game detail, and this works like that. So no new object, because the properties of the game detail have the exact same names, right? Video game ID, description, and rating. All right, and now again, pretty much the same stuff here for the reviews. So here now we insert into the reviews table the video game ID, but here now it's the reviewer name and the content, and then also the rating. And then here we have video game ID, the reviewer name, the content, and then the rating. And here we add the review, and the last one, the platforms. And here now we have a video game platforms, the joining table in the end, with only the video game ID and the platform ID. And here platform ID, and then also the video game platform. All right, I know this is a lot. I know here, let's go back to create video game async. So here we have to add our await, of course. Await, like that. So far we've got the publisher ID, the developer ID, and now comes the video game. So here now another SQL, and we write insert into video games. There's a couple of stuff that we need: the title, publisher ID, developer ID, and the release date. And in a new line, or maybe let me put this here so we pretty much see everything. Here now we say values is title, publisher ID, developer ID, and the release date like that, and then select cast, because we need the ID again, scope identity as integer. I really hope I have no typos in all that. And now here, the ID of the new game is connection query single async with an integer again, and the SQL, and now also a new object. And here we say first the video game title, and then for the publisher ID, we set the publisher ID. By the way, the first thing here works like that because title is the property name. Then developer ID is the developer ID, and the video game release date, and that's it. But here now we also need the transaction. All right, and then we can set the video game ID to the new ID. And to fix this little error here, yeah, await, and this works. All right, and now let's insert the or add the game detail, the reviews, and the platforms. So here now we first ask if we actually have game details. So if video game detail is not null, then video game detail video game ID is the ID, and we say await create game detail async connection video game detail and the transaction again for that. And now pretty similar the reviews and platforms. So if video game reviews is not null, then we say, this time in a loop because it's a list, for each, so our one-to-many relationship, review in, that's nice, IntelliCode. We set the ID, and then we also have to create it, so await create review async with the connection review and transaction, and we have to add another curly brace. Is it brace? Yeah, I think. And the last one is the platforms. So if video game platform is not null, then again we say for each a platform in video game platforms is await create video game platform async with the connection and a new video game platform object, because here now we set the video game ID to the ID and the platform ID to the platform ID, like that, and add the transaction here again. All right, and in the end, the proper end, let's have a look. Yeah, here now we say transaction commit, and we return the ID, and we have definitely some braces missing here. Let's see. We have our try block. All right, we have the using, another using, but this is missing. And now I think, hopefully, nope, there's something missing. Okay, let's remove this, and we have to put them, yeah, we have to move the methods, of course, down here, and now this should actually work. All right, now this was a lot. Now let's let's continue with the controller, and then we can test this. So the video games controller. Now, again, let's just copy that. And here we have an HTTP post, and this is now called create a video game, and actually we only get an action result back like that. And here we provide a video game like that. And now first we check if the video game is null. In that case we return a bad request, And otherwise, we do the following. We say var created ID await video game repository, create video game async with the video game, and then typically with the HTTP post, we return a created add action name of get video game, and then almost a new object where we say ID is created ID and the video game here, please. All right, now we can test this. Yep, there it is. I have an example body. Well, you see an example here thanks to Swagger, but I have another example body ready here, and this would be Hollow Knight. You see now a new publisher and a developer should be inserted, and you really have to add everything here, right? If you want to test this out. So we run execute, and JSON value could not be converted to Dapper. So something is not correct. Video game field is required. Yeah, I know what's wrong. We missed this thingy here. Let's try this one more time. Okay, there was a typo. Incorrect syntax near cast. This is the controller. Scope identity, select cast. Select cast. Yep, there it is. So here I found it. That was one of the parentheses, and also here's another one. Told you I will make some typos. Try this one more time. Post. Try this out. Opa. Okay. Execute. And invalid object name video game platforms. Okay, that's correct. We're missing the S here. Let's try that again. Try this out. Add the body and execute. And now we have it. Yeppa, nice. So Hollow Knight is here. Interesting is that the ID is 12. So let's have a look. Yeah, could be the case that it was already inserted. Not sure about that, but that it was inserted but then rolled back. And then SQL Server says, okay, it's better to use another ID here. And we can see that stuff. Of course, something is missing here, like the ID for the publisher and the developer, but we still have the game details as far as I can see. The reviews, also the IDs are missing here. But what we actually got is this location, right? So let's try that. Go to the URL, and here now we see that we also have now the publisher's ID, for instance. So publisher and developer ID, and when we try to get the single game with ID 12, we now see everything is set, right? So we have the video game ID, the publisher ID, and so on. Reviews are there, and also the platforms. Beautiful. So I know it was a lot, but creating works now, and the next step is updating. All right, and I suggest we start with the private methods that we need, because we have to update the game details and the reviews. And then what we'll also do is we will delete all the joining values for the video game platforms and then re-add them in this case. So let's just start with the game details. So private async task it is. Update game detail async. Again, same stuff really, right? So here now, let me just copy that, paste it here. But of course, this is now the game detail again, and game and detail. And now here we say string SQL is the following. We got to update game details, and we say set description to add description, then the rating to rating, where the video game ID. This is very important. Never forget the where clause in an update. Video game ID. I speak from experience. Okay, and then here await connection execute async SQL review, not the review, Jesus, we need the game detail here, game detail, and then the transaction. Okay, I hope this is correct. All right, and now for the review, update review async. We need the review here, also here. Update reviews. We set the reviewer name, then the content to the content, and actually also the rating. So like that, and we set this time the ID, or use the ID where ID is ID, execute async, and then the review. And the last one would be delete video game platforms, delete video games, game platforms. And here we have just the video game ID actually. So video game ID, and this is delete from video games platforms where video game ID is at video game ID. Execute this thing, and regarding the object we say new, and then video game ID is our video game ID. All right, this should be it, I hope. So now the actual updates. So update video game async. Again, we start with the connection with the using. So where's the create, so that I can just copy that stuff. This is just the get to create video game async. Yeah, with the try block, please. All right, and of course we have the catch. Exception using closed, another using closed, and then closing the method. Transaction roll back, throw, and this is an async method, so let's add the keyword, and then here comes the actual logic. So now we need another SQL statement, of course. String SQL is now update video games, set, oh, come on, set the title, almost the title, to title, publisher ID is publisher ID, and then developer ID is developer ID, and the release date is the release date, where ID is ID, like that. Okay, now we run this with execute async SQL and the new object. So here this time we say the video game title and the video game publisher ID, video game developer ID, video game release date, and the video game ID. And here again the transaction. All right. And now game detail, reviews, and the platforms. Similar to creating actually. So first, if video game detail is not null, then we call await update game detail async with the connection, the video game detail, and the transaction, like that. Now if the video game reviews are not null, similar stuff again in a loop. So for each var, come on, reviews, correct. Here we say await update reviews async connection review, or review, not reviews. All right, and now comes deleting all the platforms. So await delete video game platforms async with our connection, the video game ID and the transaction, and then we re-add them, let's say. So if video game platforms is not null, then we say for each platform and platforms, please create video game platforms async. And you see now it makes sense that we created these methods, right? Connection, new video game platform, like that. And here we say the video game ID is the video game ID, and platform ID is the platform ID, and we add the transaction. And in the end, we say transaction commit. When you have no typo, commit, and we are done, actually. Okay. Nice. Now again, the controller. So video games controller, we have our posts. We can copy this, use our put request method this time with, again, an ID like that, and call this update video game with the ID. Now here we do the following. We first check if video game is null or video game ID is not the provided ID. In this case, we return a bad request. Otherwise, we have to check if the video game exists. So var existing video game is await video game repository get video game async. Of course, we could do this as well in the update itself, or in the update method in the repository. Again, a couple of ways to do everything. If this thing now is null, we return a not found, like that. Otherwise, await video game repository update video game async, but with the video game, the given video game, and return no content in the end, like that. Let's try that. I have another example body ready, so let's see if this works. And this is the game with ID 5. As you can see here, this is Cyberpunk 2077. And for instance, the review says a bit buggy, but the story and world are amazing. So let's just see what we can do when we want to update this thing. So here, ID 5. We add everything. What I want to do is I want to change the review, also the description, and the title is different. Release date, I think, is also different. Yep. Well, let's see. We hit execute, and nope, invalid column. Description, yep, this is totally correct. This does not exist in the repository, of course. So description, try that again. Try this out. 5, execute, and all right. Seemed to work. Let's test that. Let's get Cyberpunk 5, execute. Yep, this looks nice. Much better experience, improved version, and so on. And of course, we can, as always, double check in the database. So pay attention to Cyberpunk 2077. Execute. This changed. The review here says a bit buggy. Much better experience. Great. All right. This worked as well, and now comes the last part, which is deleting. So let's go to we are already in the repository, and similar to the other ones, we have 2 more private methods that we should add for deleting the game detail and the reviews in particular. So down here, let's add them real quick. Private async, let me just copy that. And here it's delete the game detail async. Game detail async with the SQL connection. Here it is, the video game ID. Actually, that's correct because we're using a delete. So this should totally be sufficient. But this time here is the game details, where the video game ID is the video game ID, execute async, and this should be the same. All right, and then we have delete reviews async, same stuff with the ID, but this time from reviews, where the video game ID is the video game ID, and we're done with these little private methods. Now let's move to the big one, but first copy the usings. So create video game async it is, and the try block, and then we go to the delete video game async like that. Okay, and this is an async method. We add our catch exception like that. Close this and this and this. Transaction rollback. All right. And now in here, we actually only, well, we first start with deleting all the stuff. So await, delete video game platforms async connection, video game ID connection, video game ID. Yeah, well, let's just add the ID here and the transaction like that, and then same stuff for the game details. So game detail async, and then also for the reviews like that. Okay, and then the actual game. So for that, our SQL is delete from video games, where ID is ID, and here now we say await connection execute async SQL new ID is ID, and our transaction. And if everything worked, we commit this thing. Awesome. And now in the controller, here now, we copy this one, change the request method to HTTP delete, call this delete video game. Only the ID is necessary here. We check for the game if it does exist. And if it does, we call delete video game. All right, let's try that. And I would say, doesn't mean that I don't like this game, but it was the last one we added, so let's just try it with this thing. So ID 12, hit execute. Nothing happens here, and when we get all our games, or we don't see anything when we delete the game, we see now here, ID 10 Among Us is there, and we try to get the specific game. We get, what do we get? ID 12, execute. Yeah, untitled. Success, but nothing is there. Could change that, I think, but still, I think it worked. So here now, when we execute the SQL, yeah, the reviews are gone, and the game is also gone, and I assume that everything else, yeah, is also gone. Okay, so all this works now, but there's still one more thing that I would like to know, and this is, how would you implement all that with Entity Framework? And if you want to know that too, just click on this video here on the screen.